The woman who opened the door of his own house looked him in the face and said, "Whatever you are selling, sir, we have no money for it." Gideon Wraith, 9th Duke of Foxholm, drowned 4 years ago off the Cape, mourned, eulogized, and carved in marble in the north aisle of the parish church 3 miles down the lane, stood on his own front steps in a coat he had bought in Lisbon and could not, for a moment, produce a single word. She was perhaps 27. She wore black, but old black, the crepe rubbed to grey at the cuffs. Her sleeves were pushed up, and there was flour to the elbow on her right arm and a smudge of it on her cheekbone. Behind her, in the great stone hall of Foxholm where his father had once received a prince, he could see a line of washing strung between 2 pillars and a fire lit in the enormous hearth, with an actual cooking pot swinging over it, and a small pair of boots, very small indeed, set neatly by the fender to dry. "Sir," she said, more gently, evidently taking his silence for hunger, "there is bread, if that is what you want. Come round to the kitchen door and you shall have some. But there is no money in this house, and I will not pretend there is." Gideon found his voice. "Who," he said, "are you?" Something changed in her face, a wariness, quick and practiced, the look of a woman who has learned to be careful of men who come up drives. "I am Mrs. Marchant," she said. "I keep this house, and you have not answered a question I have not asked, which I take very ill in a stranger. Your name, sir?" He looked past her, at the washing line, at the cooking pot, at the great gilt mirror on the far wall, his grandmother's, brought from Venice, worth £800, with a child's chalk drawing of a horse on the flagstones beneath it. 4 years. 4 years of salt water and Portuguese fever wards and a merchant brig out of Bahia and a war that had swallowed him whole and spat him out at Bristol with 11 shillings and a scar down his ribs. He had rehearsed this moment on every one of the 220 miles from Bristol. In none of the rehearsals had there been a woman in his doorway with flour on her face. "My name," said Ginraith, "is Foxholm." He watched her go white to the lips. She did not scream, she did not swoon, and she did not run. Elspeth Marchant put one hand flat against the door frame as though the house had moved under her, and she looked at him, really looked, at his face, at the way he stood, at the ring he was not wearing and the height of him and something, apparently, about the eyes. And her breath went out of her in a long, unsteady rush. "He is dead," she said. "The Duke of Foxholm is dead. He went down with the Antigone off the Cape in the spring of the year 8. There is a stone in the church." "There is," Gideon agreed. "I read it this morning. It is very handsome. It says I was beloved, which I doubt, and that I was lost, which is nearer the mark." He took one step up. "Madam, I have walked from the village, and I have been 4 years getting home, and I find a stranger in my hall and a fire in a grate that has not been lit since my mother died. So I will ask you once more, and civilly, and then I shall stop being civil. Who are you, and by whose leave are you living in my house?" And Elspeth Marchant, white as paper, said the last thing on earth he expected. "By yours," she said. There was a silence in which he could hear a rook, somewhere out over the beaches, going about its business as though the world had not tilted. "That," said Gideon, "is a light." Her chin came up. Her voice was shaking, and she went on anyway. "I have a paper. It is signed with the Foxholm seal, and it grants Mrs. Beth Marchant, widow, the use of the west wing and the home farm of Foxholm rent-free for the term of her natural life, in consideration of a debt owed by the house of Wraith, which the said house does not name." She swallowed. "It came to me by a lawyer in the year 9, a year after you drowned, sir, and I have kept it in a locked box for 4 years, and read it perhaps 1,000 times, and I have never once understood it." Gideon Wraith stood in his own doorway and felt the ground go out from under him for the 2nd time in 4 years. "Show me," he said. She took him into the small parlour, his mother's morning room he saw with a lurch, the good furniture gone, and in its place a deal table, 2 mended chairs, a work basket, a slate. On the slate, in a wobbling round hand, someone had been practising the letter G. He did not look at the slate. She brought the box. She unlocked it with a key she wore on a ribbon round her neck, and she laid the paper on the deal table and stood back with her hands folded, and Gideon read it. It was his seal. It was the Foxholm seal, the fox and the 3 ash keys, pressed clean into red wax. The paper was dated the 11th of November, in the year 9, 18 months after the Antigone went down, and it was drawn by Prentice and Hod of Lincoln's Inn, who had been the family's men of law for 60 years, and it was, so far as he could judge, entirely unimpeachably valid. It was also signed, not by him. It was signed PP for the estate of Foxholm, in the exercise of the powers of the deed of trust, and beneath that, in a small, cramped, painfully familiar hand, Ambrose Wraith, my cousin, said Gideon slowly, gave you this house. A part of it. The west wing, which is damp, and the home farm, which is poor. She was watching him with those steady, frightened eyes. Sir, your grace, I did not ask for it. I did not know your family. My husband died at Talavera, and I was 3 months from the workhouse when a lawyer walked into my lodgings in Bristol and handed me that paper and told me a house was waiting for me in Somerset, and I was not to ask why. Voice cracked once, and she mastered it. I have asked why every day since. In consideration of a debt owed by the House of Wraith, Gideon read aloud, which the said house does not name. Madam. He set the paper down. What was your husband's name? John Marchant. He was a lieutenant of the 43rd. Nothing. It meant nothing. Gideon searched the name as a man searches a dark room and found only walls. And you have never met my cousin Ambrose. Never in my life. He looked at her for a long moment. She was frightened. He could see the pulse going in her throat, and she was not lying. He had spent 4 years in places where a man learned very quickly to tell the difference, and he would have staked what remained of his fortune on it. Elspeth Marchant did not know what she had been paid for, which meant that somebody did. Where is my cousin? He said. At Foxholm Ash, sir. The Dower House. He has been there these 3 years since he took the title. She hesitated. They call him your grace in the village. I am sure they do. Gideon walked to the window. Below him the long lawn ran down to the beach avenue, and the beach avenue ran down to the gate. And beyond the gate lay 11,000 acres that had been Wraitherland since the conquest, and which, 4 years ago, in a black hour off the Cape with the water coming over the rail, he had entirely made up his mind never to see again. And there, on the gravel of the sweep, bowling a wooden hoop, entirely absorbed, entirely careless of the world, was a small figure in a blue coat, 4 or 5 years old, with a shock of dark hair. Gideon watched the hoop go over. He watched the small figure right it with great seriousness and set it going again. That, he said without turning round, is yours. Behind him, Elspeth Marchant's voice came very quietly. Yes, how old? A pause. 4, she said. 4 years and 5 months. Gideon Wraith stood at the window with his hands behind his back and did the arithmetic, and felt the cold come up through the floor. Your husband, he said, died at Talavera. Talavera was fought in July of the year 9. Yes, and your son was born in the January before it. Her voice was steel now. He is John Marchant's son, your grace, and if you were about to say the other thing, I would ask you to consider very carefully what kind of man you wish to be in the first hour of coming home. Gideon turned round. She was standing in the middle of that shabby room with her fists at her sides and her chin up and her eyes blazing, a woman in a dead man's black with flour on her cheek, absolutely alone in the world, facing down a duke who could put her on the road with a word, and doing it anyway. Because he had said something insulting about a small boy bowling a hoop. 4 years he had spent among men who would sell their mothers for a dry berth. Mrs. Marchant, he said, I beg your pardon. That was unworthy, and I did not finish the sentence because I'd already heard myself. He inclined his head properly, as he would have to a duchess. You have my apology. She blinked. Whatever she had braced for, it had not been that. Then what? She said unevenly. Are you going to do with us? I am going to eat some of that bread, said Gideon Wraith, because I have not eaten since Bath, and then I'm going to walk to the Dower House and ask my cousin why he has been signing my name. Ambrose Wraith dropped his glass on the hearthrug of Dower House and did not stoop to pick it up. You are dead, he said. So everyone tells me. Gideon shut the door behind him and leaned against it. It is remarkable how little difference it seems to have made. Sit down, cousin. You have gone a colour I have only seen once before on a man about to be flogged, and it did not suit him either. His cousin sat down. He was a narrow, sandy man of 45 with clever hands and a weak mouth, and he had been afraid of Gideon since they were boys, and 4 years of being called your grace had not mended it. There was a report, Ambrose said hoarsely. The Antigone struck. There were no survivors. The Admiralty, there were 11 survivors. There were 9 after the 3rd day and 4 after the 5th, and there was 1 when the Concepcio took us off, and I have had 4 years and a great deal of leisure in which to wonder why not 1 letter of mine was ever answered. Gideon crossed the room. I wrote from Lisbon. I wrote from Bahia. I wrote to Prentice and Hod twice in the year 10. Where are my letters, Ambrose? Ambrose Wraith put his face in his hands. It took 20 minutes, and it was not, in the end, very interesting. It rarely is. There had been 1 letter, 1 from a fever ward in Lisbon in the winter of the year 10, in a hand so wrecked by sickness that a man might in good conscience have doubted it, and Ambrose had held it over a candle in this very room and told himself the doubt was honest, and had gone on telling himself so for 3 years, and had not slept properly in any of them. I would have written back, he whispered. In a month, I told myself. In a year. When the estate was settled. When it stopped being convenient, said Gideon. Yes. Ambrose looked up, and his eyes were red and wretched. Yes. God help me. Yes. Gideon stood over him. He had rehearsed this too, on all those miles. He had imagined striking him. He had imagined the magistrate and the ruin and the pleasure of it. He found, standing there, that he was too tired, and that his cousin was already in a gale that no key of Gideon's could open. The house in Somerset, he said instead. The paper you signed, Mrs. Marchant. And Ambrose Wraith looked up with such naked, desperate relief that Gideon understood, all at once, that he had come to the thing that mattered. That was not theft, Ambrose said. That, at least, Gideon, that was not theft. That was the codicil. What codicil? Your father's. Ambrose wiped his face. Sealed, lodged with Prentice in the year 6, 2 years before he died, to be opened by whoever held the estate. I opened it in the year 9 because I had to. He got up unsteadily and went to a cabinet and unlocked it, and brought out a folded paper gone yellow at the creases and held it out. Read it. Read it, and then tell me what you think of your father, and after that you may tell me what you think of me, and I dare say the accounts will look a little different. Gideon read it standing by the window with the light failing over the beeches. It was in his father's hand. It began without preamble. Because I have not the courage to say this aloud to any living soul, I set it down here, to be found when I am past being ashamed. And then it told him, in 11 lines, what he had spent 26 years refusing to remember. There had been a gamekeeper at Foxholm called Thomas Marchant. Gideon knew the name the moment he saw it. The walls of the dark room fell in on him all at once. A big, slow, gentle man who had taught a duke's son to set a snare and had never once told anyone that the duke's son could not swim. In the winter of the year 86, 3 of the 8th Duke's pheasant coverts had been robbed, and the 8th Duke, who was a hard man and a proud one, had wanted a thief. And there had been a boy of 12 standing in the estate room with his father's hand on his shoulder and half the parish watching, and his father had said, "You were out that night. You saw a man in the long covert. Was it Marchant?" And the boy had been terrified, and the boy had said yes. He had not seen a man. He had not seen anything. He had been out where he should not have been, and he was frightened of his father as a rabbit is frightened of a dog, and he had said the word his father wanted because it made the hand come off his shoulder. Thomas Marchant had been tried at the assizes and transported for 7 years, and had died of the flux in the 2nd year, in a place whose name nobody at Foxholm ever bothered to learn. His wife had gone to her sister in Bristol. His son, John, aged 9, had gone with her. My son told a lie the 8th Duke had written, and I made him tell it. I knew within the 12-month that Marchant was innocent. Ryland confessed it on his deathbed, and I paid Ryland's widow £40 to be silent, and I have been silent myself for 20 years, and I am now dying, and I find that God is not so easily paid. Whoever reads this, find the Marchants. Whatever remains of them, give them something of ours land, a roof, a living. I do not care what, and never tell them why, for I will not have my son learn that his father let him carry it. He was 12 years old. It was my doing. It has been my doing every day since. Gideon Wraith stood at the window of the dower house for a long time. He never spoke of it, he said at last. His voice did not sound like his own, not once, not in 20 years. He watched me go to sea to be rid of this house, and he never once He was a coward, said Ambrose quietly, in that one thing. And so am I in all of them. It runs in the family, Gideon. It is the only thing that does. Gideon walked back to Foxholm in the dark 3 miles and did not remember one step of it. She was in the kitchen. The boy was asleep upstairs. He could hear faintly the creak of a bed above. Elspeth Marchant was scouring a pot she did not need to scour, because she had been sitting for 6 hours waiting to be told whether she had a home, and a woman like that does not sit still. She looked up when he came in and rose to her feet. "Sit down," Gideon said, "please." She did not sit down, Mrs. Marchant. He put the codicil on the kitchen table and stood back from it. "Your husband's father was called Thomas Marchant. He was gamekeeper at this house. He was transported in the year 87 for a theft he did not commit, on the word of a boy of 12, and he died in the colonies, and the boy's name was Gideon Rath." The pot slipped out her hands into the water. He told her all of it. He did not soften one syllable of it, and he did not offer himself a single excuse, because the truth was that a frightened boy had opened his mouth, and a good man had died on the other side of the world, and there was no arrangement of the words that made it into anything else. "Read it," he said. "It is my father's hand. It says he made me say it. That is true. Does not signify. I said it." He set his hands on the back of a chair because he needed something to hold. "You have been living for 4 years on the charity of the house that destroyed your husband's family, and you were never told why. Because my father did not want me to have to know. That is the debt the house does not name, madam. It is mine. It was always mine." Elspeth Marchant read the paper. She read it twice standing, with the water dripping off her wrists onto the flags. Then she folded it very carefully and set it down and looked at him, and her face was a wreck. "He used to talk about his father," she said. "He remembered him, 9 years old. He remembered everything. He said his father was the gentlest man in Somerset, and that they came for him at supper, and that he never understood, not to his dying day, what it was he was supposed to have done, or why." Her mouth was shaking. "He went for a soldier because there was nothing else. He was killed at Talavera in a ditch, and he never knew. And I have been keeping your house. I have been grateful to you. I have taught my son to say the Duke of Foxholm was a good man in his prayers." "Stop," said Gideon. "Please stop." And all of it was, she could not finish. She stood in the middle of that kitchen with her hands over her mouth, and Gideon Rath, 9th Duke of Foxholm, who had survived a shipwreck and a fever and 4 years of hell, discovered that he had never in his life been in any real pain before. "I will not ask you to forgive me," he said. "You could not, and you should not, and I would think less of you if you did it easily. But you will not be turned out of this house. Not this week, not ever. The West Wing is yours by law, and I will make the whole of it yours by deed tomorrow, and there will be an income, and the boy will go to school, a good school, and then to Oxford if he has the wits for it, and he shall never want for anything, and none of it is charity." He straightened. "It is a debt. It is 24 years overdue, and it does not begin to cover the principal. And when it is done I will go away, and you need never look at my face again." He turned to the door. "Your Grace," said Elspeth Marchant. He stopped. "You could have said nothing," she said. "You could have burned that paper the way your cousin burned your letter. I would never have known. I would have gone on being grateful to you for the rest of my life." "Yes," said Gideon. "Why didn't you?" He stood with his hand on the door of his own kitchen and did not turn round. "'Cause I told one lie when I was 12 years old," he said, "and it has cost a great deal, and I have not told another since, and I find I'm not going to start with you." He did not go away. He meant to. He gave himself a fortnight to set the estate in order, and he took a room at the inn in the village because he would not sleep under a roof where his presence was a wound, and every morning he walked the 3 miles up the beach avenue to do the work, the rents, the drains, the 4 years of Ambrose's careless stewardship. And every evening he walked back down again to the inn without going near the West Wing. It lasted 11 days. On the 12th, coming up the avenue in the rain, he found a small figure in a blue coat sitting on the bottom step of the terrace with a wooden hoop across his knees, soaked through and perfectly composed. "You are the Duke," the small figure said. "I am. Mama says you are mending the roof." "I am mending a great many things," said Gideon. "Why are you sitting in the rain?" Because the hoop is broken, said the small figure, with the calm of a man stating a fact of natural philosophy, and Mama is crying in the dairy and I am not to notice. Gideon Wraith stood in the rain for a moment. Then he sat down on the wet step beside a 5-year-old boy, took the broken hoop, turned it over in his hands, found the split in the ash where the withy had gone, and said, "Your grandfather could have mended this in 4 minutes. He taught me to whittle when I was younger than you. I was not a good pupil. I am afraid it will take me rather longer." Took him 20 minutes, with a pocket knife and a strip of leather from his own bootlace, and it was an ugly job and it held. The boy went off down the avenue with it, bowling and shouting, and Gideon sat on in the rain until his coat was black with it. Then he got up and went to the dairy. She was not crying by the time he got there. She had a churn handle in her fist and her eyes were red, and she looked at him with the sort of composure that costs more than tears. "He mend the hoop," she said. "Yes. He has been asking for a man to mend it for a year and a half," said Elspeth Marchant. "And there has not been one." And then her face went, and she put her forehead down against the churn, and Gideon crossed that dairy in 3 strides and did not touch her, 'cause he had no right, and stood there with his fists closed at his sides, feeling more useless than he had felt on a raft in the South Atlantic. "Tell me what to do," he said. "There is nothing I would not do. Tell me and it is done. That is the trouble." She lifted her head. "That is exactly the trouble, Your Grace. You have said it every day for a fortnight. There is nothing you would not do. You will give me the wing, and the farm, and a school, and Oxford, and an income, and you will go away and never trouble me, and every stone of it laid down out of guilt, and I am to live in it, and eat it, and be warmed by it for the rest of my life. Do you know what that is?" Her voice cracked. "That is your father's £40. That is Ryland's widow. That is a man buying his conscience clean with a house instead of a purse, and I will not be paid, sir. I will not spend the rest of my life being the receipt for your sin." Gideon Wraith stood in a dairy in a wet coat and took the truce blow of his life. "Then what?" he said. "Elspeth, in God's name." "What?" "Stay," she said. He stared at her. "Stay," she said again furiously, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. "Stop walking down that avenue at night as though you are doing me a kindness. You are not doing me a kindness. You are doing yourself a penance, and I am the whip, and I am sick of it. Come to dinner. Come and be sworn at, and argue with me about the drains, and mend the hoop, and let him ask you 1,000 questions about the sea, because he has no one to ask, and he is 5 years old, and there is a hole in his life the shape of a man. You want to pay the debt." She was blazing now. "Then pay it in the only coin I want. Be here and be ordinary, and let me be angry with you when I am angry, and let me stop being grateful, because gratitude is the loneliest thing in the world." The rain came down on the dairy roof. "You are asking me," said Gideon slowly, "to stay in a house with the woman whose husband's father I am asking you," said Elspeth Marchant, "to stop hiding behind the worst hour of your childhood. You are 12. I have a son. In 7 years he will be 12, and if a great man put his hand on that boy's shoulder in front of the parish and told him what to say, he would say it, and he would be wrong, and he would not be wicked." She drew a shaking breath. "Your father was wicked. Your cousin was wicked. You were a frightened boy who has spent 36 years paying for it, and I have read that codicil until I know it by heart, and the only line in it I cannot forgive is the last one. Never tell them why. He would have let you go to your grave never knowing, and he would have let me go to mine. And you came into my kitchen with the paper in your hand and told me. Do you understand what that cost? And do you understand that I saw it?" Gideon could not speak at all. "I have been 4 years alone in a house that was given to me for a reason nobody would name," she said, more quietly. "I know now. It is a terrible reason. It is the worst thing I have ever been told. And I would rather have the truth and a man who will not lie to me than 100 years of comfort and a stone in a church that says he was beloved." She let go of the churn. "So stay. That is what I want. That is the whole account, Your Grace. Settle it or do not." Gideon Wraith stayed. He came to dinner. He came the next night and the night after that. And he sat at a deal table in his own mother's morning room and was contradicted about the drains and about the school and about very nearly everything else, and he found, slowly, and then not slowly at all, that he had not been happy in 11 years and had entirely forgotten what it felt like. He answered 1,000 questions about the sea. He answered them at breakfast and on the terrace, and once, memorably at 11 at night on the stairs, and he learned to make a bowline and a sheepshank and a monkey's fist all over again in order to teach them. And there came an evening in November when he looked up from the fire and found Elspeth watching him across the hearth with an expression that stopped his heart in his chest. She looked away at once. She did not look away fast enough. He did not speak of it for 4 months. He would not, on his life, have her feel that the account was still open, that there was anything owing, that the roof overhead had any price at all. So he waited, through the winter, through the mending of the west wing and the ploughing of the home farm, and the day the marble tablet came out of the north aisle of the parish church, and a new one went up in its place, which read simply, Thomas Marchant, gamekeeper of this parish, ronged by this house. And here it last acknowledged, and Gideon Rather stood in front of it, hat in hand, in front of the whole village, and read it aloud, and told them what he had done when he was 12 years old. There was not a sound in that church. And then an old woman in the third pew, who had been in service at Foxholm in the year 86, stood up and said, well, he was a good man, and it took a duke 60 years to say so, and I am glad I lived to hear it, and sat down again, and that was all the absolution he ever got or ever asked for. Elspeth was waiting for him in the porch. She did not say anything. She put her hand through his arm, in front of the entire parish, and walked him out into the March sunshine, and did not let go. He asked her in April, in the Beech Avenue, with no ring, because he had thought about a ring for a week, and concluded that anything he could buy her was an insult. I have nothing to offer you, he said, that you have not already had thrown at you as a payment. That is the difficulty. Everything I own is the thing I owe you. He stopped and turned to face her, and found his voice was not steady. So I have only got the one thing left that was never part of the debt, and I do not know what it is worth, and I am afraid it is not very much. It is only me, Elspeth. It is a man of 36 who has been drowned and buried and lied about, and who has been in love with you since you told him he was unworthy on his own doorstep. That is all there is. It is not a payment. It cannot be. A man cannot pay a debt with the one thing he wants most in the world. Elspeth Marchant stood in the green shade of the beeches with her hands in his. No, she agreed. He cannot. He can only give it away. Then take it, said Gideon. I have had it for months, you great fool, she said, and pulled his head down and kissed him under the trees where his father's gamekeeper had once taught a boy to set a snare. They were married in the parish church that summer, under the new tablet, and the bride wore blue and not black. And a small boy in a blue coat carried the ring on a cushion the whole length of the aisle with an expression of enormous and unshakable gravity, and did not drop it, and was insufferable about it for a fortnight afterwards. Ambrose Rather was not there. He was in the dower house at Foxholm Ash, where he lived out his days on a pension he had not earned and could not refuse, and he wrote to his cousin twice a year, and Gideon answered every letter, briefly, and never once forgave him, and never once let him starve. And if there is a better name for that than mercy, Gideon never found it. And in the great stone hall at Foxholm, where a prince had once been received, they kept the fire lit and the cooking pot swinging and a chalk horse on the flagstones under the Venetian mirror, because the new duchess said a house that has been a tomb for 4 years has earned a little untidiness. And Gideon Wraith, who had crossed 2 oceans and come home to find a stranger in his doorway, would stand sometimes at the head of the stairs in the evening and look down at the light and the noise and the small boots by the fender, and understand that he had not, in fact, come home at all until the day she told him to stay.